Hello, everyone. The main character in the story I'm about to share with you today is a young man with a bright face and a radiant smile. His name was Zulfahan. He was a student at the National Defense University of Malaysia, an outstanding young man excelling in his studies, warm-hearted and full of promise. He should have had a bright future ahead of him. But one fateful day, Zulfahan was found dead after being tortured with something shockingly familiar in our everyday lives, a steam iron. After losing their son in such a tragic and unjust way, Zulfahan's parents spent the next 7 years relentlessly fighting for justice. And finally, on July 26, 2024, a major turning point arrived in the case. But what exactly happened? Let's go back to May 13, 2017. On the campus of the National Defense University of Malaysia, a student named Akmal discovered that his newly bought laptop had mysteriously gone missing. He searched everywhere, but when it turned up nowhere, he started to suspect it had been stolen, though he had no idea who might have taken it. While Akmal was struggling with the situation, his friend Ashraf suggested something strange. He said that his father was a spiritual healer, a bomo, and could call on spirits to find the culprit. It sounded absurd, but Akmal believed it without hesitation. He went to Ashraf's father and followed through with a ritual, and, by eerie coincidence, the name that came up was Zulfahan. At the time, Zulfahan was a 21-year-old young man. His father was a taxi driver, and his mother worked in a school cafeteria. They were a modest working-class family, not wealthy, but full of love and care for one another. As the eldest of 4 siblings, Zulfahan always carried a strong sense of responsibility. In 2014, he passed the entrance exam for the electrical engineering program at the Defense University and became a naval cadet. For his family, it was a moment of immense pride, a symbol of hope and a doorway to a better future. But all of that was crushed, destroyed by a baseless accusation. After receiving the supposed spiritual revelation, Akmal flew into a rage. Around 1 a.m. that very night, he and a group of friends stormed into Zulfahan's dorm room. Without a word, they dragged him out of bed and demanded he confess where the laptop was hidden. They tore the room apart, searching for evidence. Despite being falsely accused, Zulfahan firmly denied any involvement. He had no idea what they were talking about, but Akmal was convinced he had the right guy. Even though they found no trace of the laptop, Akmal and his gang decided to take things even further. They dragged Zulfahan into the room next door and began a brutal torture session. They punched him, whipped him with belts, and beat him with coat hangers, trying to force a confession. Zulfahan cried and begged, but they showed no mercy. It wasn't until the early hours of the morning that the violence finally paused, but Zulfahan's nightmare was far from over. In the early morning of May 20th, around 3 a.m., Akmal and the others returned to his room for a second round of torture. If they had shown even a shred of restraint the first time, this time it was gone. Madness had completely taken over these young men. The more they hit, the more exhilarated they became. Around 4 a.m., one of the attackers, a boy named Abdul Hakim, came up with an unimaginably cruel idea to use a steam iron to torture Zulfahan. The suggestion was immediately embraced by the other 5. One by one, they took turns pressing the scorching hot iron against his body. As a result, except for his face and the backs of his hands, almost no part of Zulfahan's body was left unburned. He suffered burns over 80% of his body, with more than 90 distinct injuries, 30 of them third-degree burns layered on top of one another. Even more horrifying, not even his private parts were spared from this brutal assault. The truth is, third-degree burns are devastating. They destroy the skin entirely, often reaching deep into fat tissue and even bone, leaving permanent damage. Victims typically require painful skin graft surgeries to have any hope of recovery. And the steam iron they used? Its lowest temperature exceeds 90 degrees, while its maximum can reach up to 200 degrees C. Imagine the kind of unbearable pain inflicted when such intense heat is pressed directly onto human flesh. From 4 in the morning until 11 a.m., Zulfahan endured this savage torture. Naturally, you'd expect that a beating this loud, happening right inside a dormitory, would attract attention. Someone should have reported it. Maybe then, the nightmare could have been stopped before it was too late. So why didn't anyone save him? In reality, word about the abuse had already spread among the students after the first incident. That night, aside from the attackers, a few other students were present, standing and watching, but no one dared to step in. Some were simply curious, wanting to see what would happen. Others felt pity, but were too afraid to act, knowing full well that defending Zulfahan might turn them into the next targets. Violence among students at the National Defense University of Malaysia wasn't unusual. According to accounts from former students, an unspoken rule had taken root there. Personal conflicts were often settled with fists, not formal reports. Anyone who broke that rule risked group retaliation. Worse still, Akmal and his gang insisted that Zulfahan was the thief. Many students who weren't directly involved believed them. As rumors spread, they got twisted, and with so much fear and uncertainty, almost no one dared to speak up for Zulfahan. After the first beating, Zulfahan had only external injuries. Fearing retaliation, he chose to stay silent and endure the pain. But during the second round of torture, the violence escalated to the point that he could no longer walk. He could only lie there, moaning in agony, inside his dorm room. One of Zulfahan's close friends, Ofar, secretly came to visit him. According to Ofar, Zulfahan was lying motionless on the bed, his entire body covered in blistered, swollen burns. Some of the wounds were oozing pus, and his skin was mottled with blackened, charred patches. Through the pain, Zulfahan whispered a plea. He begged Ofar to apply medicine to his wounds while he slept, and if possible, to tell a teacher to get help. Ofar truly wanted to help his friend, but fear of retaliation kept him from speaking up directly. Instead, he wrote 2 anonymous letters. One was slipped into the office of the university administration, and the other was tucked into the fence surrounding the on-campus hospital. The letters were desperate pleas for help. If the teachers still have any humanity, any compassion, please go immediately to room 410 in the Sakura block. Someone there is in critical condition and needs urgent medical attention. Unfortunately, due to a critical misstep by the school administration, those letters didn't save Zulfahan. Instead, they pushed him into even greater danger. Upon receiving the anonymous note, rather than discreetly investigating, a teacher posted the letter's contents publicly in the school's chat group, asking who was staying in room 410 and instructing that person to come forward and report. As soon as Akmal and his group saw the message, they panicked. Acting quickly, they sneaked into the dorm, took Zulfahan out of the school, and hid him in an off-campus apartment to avoid discovery. By the time school officials arrived to inspect room 410, it was already empty. There was no trace left. As time passed, Zulfahan's condition worsened. His wounds became more serious by the day. Akmal and his gang began to worry that if Zulfahan died, the truth would come to light. In an attempt to cover up what had happened, they decided to send 3 students to take Zulfahan to a private clinic for treatment. When the doctor examined him, he was horrified. The young man's body was covered in severe burns with dangerous complications. His condition was extremely difficult to manage. After initial first aid and cleaning the wounds, the doctor urged the students to take Zulfahan immediately to the provincial hospital. At the same time, he began to suspect something was terribly wrong. Why was the patient in such critical condition? And why hadn't he been brought to a hospital sooner? Akmal and his accomplices made up a story. They claimed that Zulfahan had been injured in an explosion during a training session. They insisted that his wounds were only superficial and could be treated with simple ointment. But it was all a lie. In reality, after leaving the private clinic, they never took Zulfahan to the hospital. Time continued to slip by. Then, on the night of June the 1st, around 9 p.m., while they were moving Zulfahan to the house of one of the perpetrators, his condition suddenly deteriorated. With no other options, they were forced to take him to the provincial hospital for emergency care. But it was already too late. Despite the doctor's best efforts, they couldn't save him. That night, the young man Zulfahan passed away, forever. Soon after, Malaysian police received the report and immediately launched an investigation. They quickly detained the 2 students who had brought Zulfahan to the hospital. From there, the investigation uncovered the individuals behind the abuse. By 11:30 p.m. that same day, police had arrested a total of 36 people, all of whom were present when Zulfahan was first assaulted. However, after thorough investigation, only 19 were officially charged with intentional bodily harm. Of those, 6 faced the most serious charge: murder. The 6 included Abdul Hakim, the one who used the hot iron to torture the victim, along with Akmal and 4 others who directly inflicted the severe burns on Zulfahan's body. The trial dragged on for 4 long years from indictment to final verdict. During the proceedings, one defendant was released on July 31, 2019, due to insufficient evidence. In the end, 18 individuals were convicted and held accountable under the law. On October 2, 2021, the High Court of Kuala Lumpur sentenced Akmal and his 5 accomplices to 18 years in prison for manslaughter. The remaining 12 were sentenced to 3 years for causing intentional injury. However, the verdict sparked outrage from both the victim's family and the public. Throughout the prolonged torture of Zulfahan, Akmal and his group showed complete disregard for his cries of pain. They repeatedly pressed a steaming hot iron against his body, causing burns that covered 80% of his skin. Even when the doctor at the private clinic urged them to take him to a proper hospital, they stubbornly refused. According to the forensic report, Zulfahan died from severe burns. Had he been taken to the hospital in time, his chances of survival would have been significantly higher. What made matters worse was the utter lack of remorse shown by the 6 perpetrators after Zulfahan's death. Neither they nor their families ever offered an apology or expressed regret to the victim's grieving parents. In light of their cruelty, prosecutors argued that a manslaughter conviction was far too lenient and legally unacceptable. They decided to file an appeal, seeking harsher sentences, possibly even the death penalty. After 2 years of legal proceedings, on July 23, 2024, a panel of judges led by Justice Hadaraya reinstated the murder charges against the 6 defendants and converted their 18-year prison terms into death sentences. Judge Hadaraya declared that this murder case had not only shaken the legal system, but had also struck at the conscience of the entire nation. He emphasized, "We unanimously agree that the only fitting punishment for these 6 individuals is to send them to the gallows." Additionally, the sentences for the remaining 12 convicts were each increased by 1 year. Upon hearing the verdict, Zulfahan's parents broke down in tears. As soon as they stepped out of the courtroom, they dropped to their knees, giving thanks to the heavens and expressing deep gratitude to the court for delivering justice to their son. Yet the case wasn't fully closed. The defendants still retained the right to appeal in hopes of reducing their sentences. Malaysia's judicial system is divided into 2 main levels: the trial courts and the appellate courts. The trial level includes magistrate courts, sessions courts, and the High Court. The appellate level consists of the Court of Appeal and the Federal Court, with increasing authority from one tier to the next. Only the High Court and above are authorized to hear capital cases and issue death sentences. In this case, because the prosecution had sought the death penalty from the outset, the trial was held directly in the Kuala Lumpur High Court. When Maus Babonim C, the initial sentence, was deemed unsatisfactory, prosecutors appealed to the Court of Appeal, which ultimately led to the 6 death penalties being imposed. However, the defendants still had one final option: to bring their case before the federal court, where the ultimate ruling would be made. If the death sentences are upheld at the federal level, they will be carried out. If not, there remains a possibility that the court might re-examine the case and reduce the punishment. When reviewing the case, the federal court will place particular weight on the opinions of the Court of Appeal. One striking detail in the appellate ruling was the use of the phrase, "the rarest of the rare." This phrase was employed to emphasize the unprecedented level of brutality and cold-bloodedness displayed by the 6 defendants. The court's use of such a term was also a message to the federal court that these crimes were of such extreme nature that the death penalty is not only justified, but necessary. This became especially significant in light of Malaysia's decision to abolish the mandatory death penalty, a law passed on April 3, 2023. Previously, if a crime met the criteria for capital punishment, the court had no choice but to impose a death sentence. However, with the new law in effect, Judges now have the discretion to weigh each case individually, allowing for the death penalty to be replaced with life imprisonment or alternative punishments. The court can also take into account the motive behind the crime when determining whether a death sentence is warranted. In other words, when it comes to particularly heinous crimes, the power to decide between life and death now lies more squarely in the hands of the judge. Although Malaysia has not fully abolished capital punishment, the country is clearly moving toward a more rehabilitative approach, one that emphasizes education and reform over retribution. Never before has a school violence case in Malaysia resulted in a death sentence. And especially for defendants who have only just reached adulthood, the courts often take their potential for rehabilitation into serious consideration before passing judgment. This is why the use of the phrase, "the rarest of the rare," in the appellate court's ruling is so pivotal. Without it, Akmal and his co-defendants might still have stood a strong chance at reducing their sentences when appealing to the federal court. But once the federal court recognized that the Court of Appeal had already determined the crime to be of exceptional severity, the possibility of overturning the death sentence became significantly slimmer. It all stands as proof that justice, though it may be delayed, will never be denied. Except for the so-called sorcerer who evaded capture early on, every one of the perpetrators was ultimately held accountable and received due punishment. When the verdict was made public, Justice Hadiraya was widely praised as a modern-day Bao Zheng, a judge known for his unwavering fairness and integrity. The heartbreaking story of Zulfahan Osman Zulkarnain serves as a grim reminder of the devastating effects of school violence, not only the physical damage it causes, but the way it erodes human dignity, morality, and compassion. When silence and indifference become accomplices, cruelty is given the space to grow unchecked. As the old proverb goes, we are not born with hatred, we learn it from our surroundings. Violence doesn't appear out of nowhere. It grows in the soil of tolerance, thrives on mob mentality, and is nourished by the negligence of those who were supposed to protect the vulnerable. If we are to prevent tragedies like this from happening again, our schools must be more than places of academic learning. They must become environments that cultivate empathy, accountability, and mutual respect. Let us not allow today's silence to become tomorrow's regret.
Life skills can be incredibly important as they can sometimes mean the difference between life and death. Many victims have escaped dangerous kidnappings thanks to their quick thinking and skills acquired over time through self-learning, watching films, or following YouTube channels. Today's case is a striking example of how crucial life skills can be. In February 2017, a young woman stepped out of a hotel in downtown Adelaide, Australia, and boarded a bus heading out of the city. Judging by her attire, she appeared to be a traveler on a tight budget. Her name was Divine Arkins, a 24-year-old born and raised in a small town in Belgium. From a young age, she had dreamed of traveling the world, and after graduating from university, she set out to turn that dream into reality. In just 1 year, she visited numerous countries including South Africa, Guatemala, China, Australia, and several remote continents. Divine quickly fell in love with the untamed beauty of Australia. So different from Europe, when she arrived in Adelaide, she realized that 1 year in Australia wasn't enough to fully experience the country's wonders. Thus, when her 1-year visa expired, she extended it. The issue, however, was that her visa was a working holiday visa, which required her to work at least 88 days in industries like agriculture, harvesting, or livestock farming during her stay. If she didn't meet the work requirement, her visa wouldn't be renewed for the following year. Divine began searching for a job online. It didn't take long for someone claiming to be a farm owner named Max to send her a private message. He mentioned that his farm was about a 3-hour drive from downtown Adelaide and offered her a job taking care of calves. Divine asked Max a few questions about the job, and he patiently answered all her concerns. Gradually, she began to trust him and warmed up to the idea of the work and the farm owner himself. Max arranged for Divine to take a bus to Murray Bridge, a town south of Adelaide, the next day. He promised to pick her up from the bus stop and take her to the farm. The following day, Divine boarded a bus heading out of the city to Murray Bridge. A pickup truck was already waiting at the bus stop when she arrived. She got into the vehicle, and the journey to her new workplace began. The farm seemed incredibly remote as they drove for more than 2 hours, and even had to cross 2 ferries before arriving. The area was isolated, with no signs of neighbors nearby. Unbeknownst to Divine, she had fallen into a trap carefully laid by the man in front of her with his lies. His name wasn't Max, it was Jean Charles Bristow, a part-time farmer. Additionally, his farm wasn't as far from the city as he had made it seem. From the bus stop where Divine arrived, the farm was only about a 30-minute drive via the shortest route, passing through bustling towns. The local police station was just 1 kilometer away from Bristow's farm, but he exploited Divine's unfamiliarity with the area to take a detour that avoided all busy areas. He deliberately created the illusion that they were in a faraway, desolate place. Moreover, Bristow's family was actually on the farm, staying in a large house less than 300 meters from where he and Divine stopped. However, Bristow took advantage of a wooded area on his farm to block Divine's line of sight, making her believe they were alone on the property. This carefully orchestrated setup subconsciously made Divine feel isolated and vulnerable, weakening her psychological resistance. Bristow then led Divine into a pig shed that had been abandoned for years under the pretext of showing her the working environment. After chatting casually with Divine for a while, Bristow decided it was time to reveal his true nature. He suddenly became serious and told Divine that he despised drug addicts. He explained that a backpacker who had worked there previously caused significant trouble due to drug addiction. Hearing this, Divine quickly assured him that she had no such bad habits. However, Bristow claimed he didn't believe her and insisted on inspecting her body to check for needle marks. Divine rolled up her sleeves, revealing her unblemished arms. But Bristow remarked that addicts often inject drugs into their legs or feet, so he needed to check those areas as well. Alone in the desolate surroundings, Divine had no choice but to comply. She sat down on a worn-out sofa in the corner of the pig shed, removed her shoes and socks, and following Bristow's instructions, lay face down. Suddenly, Bristow moved closer and unexpectedly jumped onto the sofa. Pinning her down, he grabbed her arms, twisted them behind her back, and tied her hands tightly. Divine struggled with all her might, but Bristow overpowered her. He pressed a gun to her back, leaving her no choice but to surrender. He then stripped her of her clothes and assaulted her. Overwhelmed with despair, Divine thought her life would end in this filthy, decrepit pig shed swarming with flies. After the assault, Bristow wasn't done. He told her that he was a member of a powerful criminal organization operating in the area. He claimed the gang had an extensive network, including police officers as accomplices, and its main activities were kidnapping and human trafficking. Bristow emphasized that Divine was now a property of the gang. He said they would soon sell her into the adult entertainment industry in Sydney or Melbourne if she resisted or tried to escape. Gang members monitoring her would ensure her silent disappearance. Divine, utterly terrified, believed every word. She began obeying Bristow's orders and acted submissively, which pleased him greatly. Occasionally, Bristow would leave her alone in the shed. His family, living in a house just 300 meters away from the farm, had no idea about his crimes, so he would return home occasionally to avoid suspicion. At dusk, Bristow would return to the shed, threaten Divine again, and then leave in a hurry. Before leaving, Bristow rummaged through an unused refrigerator. In those brief moments, Divine caught sight of some metal hooks inside. This gave her a glimmer of hope for escape. If she could get hold of one of those metal hooks, she might be able to undo the chains binding her hands and feet. After hearing Bristow's footsteps fade into the distance, Divine quickly opened the refrigerator, grabbed a small metal hook, and began working to loosen the bolts on her shackles. After some effort, she finally managed to loosen the last bolt. Overjoyed, Divine freed herself from the chains on her hands and feet. Despite being unchained, but she was still uncertain of her surroundings, because Bristow had deliberately taken a remote route. She had no idea that just 1 kilometer away lay a town and a police station. She feared getting lost in the wilderness at night, and was even more terrified of being pursued by the gang Bristow had mentioned, which might subject her to even greater suffering and a tragic fate. At that moment, her eyes fell on her backpack, which Bristow had tossed into a distant corner earlier. She hurried over, opened it, and discovered that her laptop and a USB network dongle were still inside. It seemed Bristow had taken her phone and assumed that was enough to cut her off from the outside world, so he hadn't checked her backpack thoroughly. His carelessness gave Divine a chance to survive. She plugged the USB dongle into her laptop and powered it on. praying fervently that Bristow wouldn't return at that moment. When the laptop screen lit up, she logged into her Facebook account and began sending messages pleading for help to all her friends, regardless of whether they would respond. The information Divine sent included details of her abduction and the remote location of a farm in South Australia. Before arriving at the farm, she had passed through Murray Bridge and taken 2 ferry rides. She mentioned that the man who kidnapped her drove a red pickup truck along with a few other details. However, her desperate and fragmented messages seemed like a prank or a scam, so most people ignored them. Her parents in Belgium were asleep due to the time difference and didn't see her messages. Just as Divine was losing hope, one friend finally realized it wasn't a joke and started chatting with her directly. This friend was Wang Xiaojing, a Chinese woman in Australia on a working holiday visa. The two had met during a previous trip and had become friends. At the time, Xiaojing was working in Gold Coast, thousands of kilometers away. When she learned that Divine was in danger, she became extremely worried, but being so far away, could only try to gather as much information as possible from Divine. Xiaojing helped report the case to the police and sought assistance. The two exchanged numerous messages. Divine tried to provide as many details as she could before her mobile data ran out. In an instant, she was cut off from the outside world again. Divine returned to the sofa, resecured herself with handcuffs and chains, and waited silently for rescue. She wasn't sure how much time had passed. Night had fallen when from a distance, she heard a noise growing louder and closer until it stopped overhead. Divine realized it was the sound of a helicopter engine, although the helicopter left shortly after it returned the next morning. It was in fact a South Australia police helicopter searching for her. After Xiaojing's call to South Australia Police, a local emergency alert was issued within 10 minutes. Police began deploying all resources to pinpoint Divine's location. Knowing that Divine had passed through Murray Bridge, police began analyzing the communication history of cell towers in the surrounding area. They discovered that Divine's mobile signal had interacted with several towers before disappearing. Using triangulation methods, police determined that Divine was likely being held in an area called Meningi. This region contained numerous farms and terrain features matching Divine's description. The police deployed helicopters to search the area from above, focusing on locating a red pickup truck. That morning, the police spotted Bristow's pickup truck parked under a tree nearby. However, there wasn't enough evidence to obtain a search warrant for the farm. The police could only position patrol cars to monitor the roads around the property. Bristow seemed irritated by the persistent circling of the helicopter overhead. He attempted to drive away from the farm, but as soon as he left the gate, he was stopped by police for a vehicle inspection. Finding nothing suspicious at the scene, the police temporarily let Bristow go. However, the inspection made Bristow realize he was under surveillance. Recognizing the urgency of avoiding being caught red-handed, Bristow returned to the farm and hurried to the livestock shed. He unchained Divine, helped her put on clothes, and then quickly took her to his truck. He successfully transported Divine to the bus station in Murray Bridge, where they had first met. From there, he took her to a nearby hotel and arranged a room for her. Bristow advised her to stay silent and leave Australia quickly if she didn't want to endanger herself further. After that, he left. Terrified and unsure whether his warning was genuine, Divine locked herself in the hotel room for an entire day, as too scared to step outside. However, the next day, Divine felt extremely hungry and decided to leave her room. She put on a hat and discreetly walked to a nearby store to buy food. Unfortunately, she was recognized by an off-duty police officer, and within minutes, Divine was surrounded by a group of police officers. At first, she remembered Bristow's warning that some of the police could be his accomplices. She was so terrified that she didn't dare to say anything until she was brought directly to the police station. Only then did she feel assured that she was out of danger. She then recounted the horrifying experiences she endured over the past 2 days in detail. After taking her statement, a convoy of police vehicles accompanied by dozens of officers stormed Bristow's farm. Bristow was arrested while he had shaved his head bald and was preparing to flee. The police discovered that Bristow had thrown a pair of handcuffs and leg irons into a well to destroy evidence. They also found Divine's mobile phone submerged in a tub of water and a replica gun Bristow had purchased online hidden in the farm's grass. In the livestock shed where Divine had been held, forensic evidence, including DNA, confirmed she had been imprisoned there for several days. Bristow's family was initially shocked when the police arrived and presented the accusations. After understanding the full extent of the situation and seeing the evidence police had collected, they finally realized the truth about Bristow. Following his arrest, Bristow continued to deny the charges, claiming he had been falsely accused. However, even his family testified against him in court. The court sentenced Bristow to 18 years in prison for kidnapping, rape, and other serious crimes. As for Divine, she suffered severe psychological trauma and took a long time to recover. Although the case did not result in loss of life, it was incredibly serious. If the person kidnapped had not been a strong, resilient, and quick-thinking woman like Divine, the outcome could have been far worse. Survival skills in dangerous situations such as being kidnapped are crucial. Equipping oneself with knowledge and mental preparation can significantly improve the chances of survival. Most importantly, survival skills are not just about reacting when an incident occurs, but also about being prepared beforehand. Taking self-defense classes, mastering emergency response skills, and always sharing your travel plans or location with loved ones when going out are ways to reduce the risk of kidnapping. What are your thoughts on this woman's survival skills?